are fighting each other. Well, the circumstances that started 7 years ago when the young generation in many countries all over the Middle East demonstrate for democratic society and open society against the dictators that control those societies for so many years, they had a hope and dream about having a democratic society. So it's a geopolitics issue, but it's also a lot of economic interest on the table. And it's also a religious struggle between Sunnis and Shias across the Middle East. Now, this conflict took place 100 years ago, but the crisis over the Middle East actually created a very tough struggle between Sunnis and Shias. Why they're fighting each other? They're fighting each other about the legacy of Muhammad. Who is going to lead the Islam today? The majority who are the Sunnis or the minority who are the Shiites? This is a critical struggle as part of the crisis across the Middle East. Now, we definitely can see some phenomena which has characterized the situation across the Middle East since the Arab Spring started 7 years ago. For those that dream and have a hope that we will see a democratic society, it didn't work out. There is no other democratic society across the Middle East since Israel, which is an island of stability. Why? Because those societies all over, Tunisia, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, all over, they get used to live under dictators for so many years, for decades. And I think we have to educate them for generation by generation to understand the benefits of being a democratic society. It's not going to work within days, months, or years. So sometimes when we talk about crises across the Middle East, we have to prefer stability and cooperation and do not dream about things that actually are not going to happen in the end of the day like democratic societies. Another thing that is very clear when we talk about the Arab Spring, there is a clear decline of the American influence across the Middle East since the withdrawal from Iraq in 2012. United States withdraw from all over the Middle East. Still have some deployment in Iraq and a little bit in Syria, but they have other priorities, but that's affect dramatically the situation, and that's affect dramatically the American allies, the Sunni countries across the Middle East and Israel. On the other hand, we have a dramatic increasing of the Russia influence all over the Middle East, many in Syria, and actually today Putin controls the situation in Syria. And we have also two major global terror organizations across the Middle East, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And I think we could, if you want to have a decisive victory against those global terrorists, we must have a comprehensive strategy based on 4 strong legs. One is cooperation, coalition like we had in the case of the Islamic State, 65 countries. But we need a strong cooperation, share intelligence between the coalition. We need great intelligence. That's critical. And we need boots on the ground. I think we could have a decisive victory against the Islamic State. It took 3 years. I think we could do it within a few months or maybe 1 year if we had a strong boots on the ground. And the last thing is cutting-edge technology. You know that today even the terror organization, they have cyber capability, they have advanced technology, drone capability. This is the challenge that we have to face when we are fighting those terror organizations. Now, let me start and put the details about the crisis. We're going to start with the crisis in Syria, which is actually the major concern of the future for Israel. Now, that's the situation in Syria today. The majority of Syria, over 50%, is controlled by the radical axis, which is Iran, Hezbollah, Assad regime, supported by the Russians. That's the border in the Golan Heights, the 50 miles of the Golan Heights right here. In northeast Syria, we have 30% of the Syrian territory controlled by the Kurds and American troops. And here in the north, we have Turkey military forces who actually penetrate the Syrian line and occupied all this territory. They said they are fighting ISIS, but in the end of the day, they're actually fighting the Kurds, which is the main threat for Turkey for many, many years. We can see that the Islamic State that used to be here is not exist anymore. We have two islands of ISIS terrorists right here in southern part of Syria and the east part of Iraq. I would say a few hundred terrorists here and here, but the Islamic State that used to be in this area actually, after 3 years of fighting the coalition, is not exist anymore. Now, when we talk about the situation in Syria, in my point of view, it's not a civil war, it's a terrible genocide. And the question is why the international community didn't do anything when they knew exactly what's going on. Why today, 75 years after the Holocaust, that millions of Jews and millions of people all over Europe and all over the world lost their lives, the international community actually doesn't care about what's going on here. We have over 1 million people lost their lives, over 2 million injured, and 10 million are refugees. That's the worst case since World War II. Now, there's a lot of things that the international community could do 5, 6 years ago, and it's impossible today. For example, create no-fly zone above Syria, that Assad regime cannot use their air force to kill their people. For example, train, rearm, and fund the moderate Sunnis, not Al-Qaeda, not ISIS, the moderate Sunnis who started the struggle against Assad 7 years ago. Unfortunately, today, with the deployment of the Russia right here, many things is impossible today. Now, in 2013, we have the chemical weapon crisis, and President Obama addressed the nation that's a red line from the United States point of view. And he said, I'm going to give an order to operate a heavy airstrike over Syria. But Putin was smart enough to convince Assad, take the deal, destroy your chemical capability, and prevent an American strike over Syria. So actually, in the last 6-7 years, the international community almost didn't do anything. Now, let me tell you the interest of the major actors in this game. You probably ask yourself, why Putin has a deep involvement over Syria? Because Putin used the clear decline of the American influence, and he wants his first priority is to become a global actor again. He's already there. He used the clear decline of the American influence, and he actually controlled the situation in Syria today. There's no question. Assad wouldn't survive until today without the unbelievable support of the Syrian Air Force in the last 3-4 years. The second priority from the Putin point of view is try to leverage the situation in Syria, the crisis in Syria, to other global issues. For example, stop the sanctions against his economy, and the crisis in Ukraine, a lot of global issues on the table between Russia and the United States. And you also want to keep Assad regime in his position because they have a great cooperation for decades. Now, the other major actors are the Iranians. Why the Iranians have a strategic interest to be on the Israeli border right here in the Golan Heights? Because the crisis in Syria gave the Iranian regime the first time in the history. You know, Iran is located 1,000 miles away from here, but the crisis in Syria gave the Iranian regime a great opportunity to create a threat against Israel in the Golan Heights on the ground. Now, what they plan to do, they first of all fought with Assad for years. They lost 100 warriors. They spent billions of dollars. And they also gave an order to the Hezbollah to cross the border from Lebanon and fight for Assad. And they brought 25,000 Shiite militias from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka to Syria to fight for Assad. Now when they are the winners of this struggle, they have a long-term strategy to build strategic infrastructure and create a real threat against Israel. What they plan to do is having Navy base, Air Force base, and build here like in Lebanon, 40,000-50,000 missiles that can reach Tel Aviv and every Israeli strategic spots, every Israeli Air Force base. Can Israel live with this crazy threat? Definitely not. We must stop the Iranians. Now, there is a close cooperation between Russia and Iran here in Syria. They are fighting together. They have the same interests. They want to keep Assad, but they have also a huge economic interest on the table. Gas, oil deal, and all the nuclear facilities in Iraq supplied by the Russians many years ago. So they have a very close cooperation together. And they are the winners of this game. And the major problem from the Israeli point of view is the fact that the United States is not here. The former administration and this administration don't want to jump to this swamp. Why? Probably different priorities. North Korea case, the terrible trauma from Iraq and Afghanistan war a few years ago. There's a lot of issues on the table. But the bottom line, our best allies, United States, is not part of the game. That's a big problem from the Israeli point of view. Now, Israel said from the beginning of the civil war that what's happened here is against our values, that we're not going to be. It's not going to be part of. It's not going to be our business unless it's going to touch the Israeli vital interest. And you probably have heard that Israel had a clear three red lines strategy. We put on the table 3 red lines. The first one is do not allow the Iranians to be 20 miles from the Golan Heights. This is number one. We don't want that the Iranians will create troubles to the Israeli targets right here. The second red line is to not allow the Iranians to remove advanced technology from Syria to Lebanon to the Hezbollah infrastructure. That's why you probably have heard that Israel attacked again and again in Syria those convoys that we got an unbelievable intelligence. We attacked them. When we say advanced technology, we mean long-distance missiles that can reach Tel Aviv and other Israeli strategic spots. And we mean anti-air batteries that can create some challenges to the Israeli Air Force. But the most severe threat is the fact that the Iranians wants to build here advanced industry. They want to produce the long-distance missiles under the ground here in Syria. And they want to have a crazy capability, 40,000-50,000 missiles that can reach Tel Aviv. Can Israel live with this situation? Definitely not. This is all about, and lately we saw a direct conflict between Israel and the Iranians. We attacked their drone capability a few weeks ago. Why Israel is fighting today the Iranians? Because they're just starting the project. If we're gonna wait 3-4 years, it's gonna be too late. That's why Israel is fighting now. We take a risk that maybe we'll have an escalation, but we don't have any other choice. Israel cannot live with the threat from Iran, as I told you. And there is a beautiful Israeli humanitarian project along the Golan Heights that we take care of 5,000 casualties from the battles in Syria to the Israeli hospitals for free. This is a wonderful project, and we also give 100,000 Sunnis who live here along the border in the Golan Heights. We give them food, water, medical support, and we try to open the schools that were closed for 6-7 years. And we had volunteers from all over the world. We have American from the hospital, Canadian, Australian. People come from all over the world to help Israel, to support those people that suffered so much in the last 5-6 years. So the bottom line regarding to the situation in Syria, it's a real threat for Israel, and that's why Israel took the decision to fight the Iranian threat now, because tomorrow it's going to be much more complicated. From here, I want to say a few words. Now, just one more thing about the President Trump decision on May 12th. That's very important. I think that the Iranian regime are in a real pressure right now, because they know if President Trump is going to cancel the deal and put the sanction against their economy, that's going to affect dramatically their economy. That's going to affect the people who demonstrate on the street of Tehran every day. And this maybe will change the priorities of the regime, making them much weaker, and maybe they will decide to leave the project in Syria, which is critical for Israel. So the President Trump decision is critical for the future of the region. Why it's a bad deal? That's a very good question. Why President Trump and Israel said in the last 3 years since the agreement was signed in Vienna, that's a bad deal. Because the inspection is terrible. You know, for example, the Israeli services and American services, we know that in some military sites we have some suspicious issue. We want to check it. The Iranians said, no, it's not on the list of the deal. You cannot inspect it. So there is no real inspection on what they're doing. Number two, the ballistic missile that can reach New York City and Israel, there is no limitation. It's not part of the deal. There is no inspection of this terrible project. If they're talking about a peaceful project, why do they need ballistic missiles that can reach New York City? Now, the third point, the fact that the Iranians are the largest generator for terror infrastructure all over the Middle East is not part of the deal. What do you think they're going to do with the $100 billion that we're freezing in this state for so many years? They're going to increase dramatically their budget and fund to the Hezbollah, to their supporters in Yemen, in Lebanon, all over. They're going to increase dramatically their terror infrastructure all over the globe. That's what they're going to do. So the options are canceling the deal and put the sanction, or change the deal and put a real limitation and real inspection on the Iranian project. And that's critical, and that may affect the situation here in Syria, which is critical for Israel.